Hey everyone, I'm Melissa from Knitting the Stash, and this is episode 92 in the series. This one is all about aquatic sheep. Sea silk and sea green Hopis. And we'll get to all of that in a minute. But first, welcome. It's lovely to see you guys on the cast. For you, it's probably Sunday afternoon. For me, it's Sunday morning, and it is a beautiful Sunday morning. We just took the dogs for a walk, and it's sunny outside, and it's above freezing, and these are all good things because this past week we got down to, I think, like 6 degrees or something. We were worried about the cats and the chickens outside, and anyway, it's lovely to see the sun shining out my window and to know that it is well above freezing out there. I hope you guys are doing well in the pandemic, in the winter, and the holidays, all that kind of stuff. Happy New Year, happy holidays, happy Kwanzaa, happy Christmas, happy Hanukkah, happy everything. It's nice to have something, hopefully, to celebrate, whoever you're with or just by yourself. I raise my glass to you, and I hope you've had a decent holiday season so far, all things considered, right? So today I have for you a finished object. This is the Hopi sweater by Lincoln Newman. I'll talk about that guy. I also have a fun little bit, I know we haven't done history on here in a couple episodes, but I have a fun little bit of history from, this is a new to me book, Harvest by Edward Posnett. And there's a section in here on sea silk. There's also one on vicuna fiber that I haven't gotten to yet, so I'll have a little segment on that. And I've got a few bits and bobs and things that have come in the mail that I want to share with you guys. I also have the giveaway winner for the Lupine Blossom cardigan pattern by Ravi Eckstein, so we'll get to that at the end of the episode. And just in case you want to track me down on social media, I'm pretty much Knitting the Stash everywhere, here on YouTube, on Instagram, Ravelry, and on the blog, which is knittingthestash.wordpress.com. And that's where I publish all the show notes for this episode and each episode. So if you like something that you see, you can go over there and I'll have links to everything so you can find what you're looking for. So first up, let's talk about this finished object. This is the Hopi sweater by Lincoln Newman, and I don't think I even mentioned that I was knitting this one to you guys, but I did probably mention her book maybe about a month ago. This is her second book that has just come out, and I ordered it straight from her website. In fact, I was looking for her first book, which I loved as well, but originally I was thinking, oh, it's in Norwegian, I'll wait and see if there's an English translation, and I couldn't buy it anywhere. It was really kind of a complicated situation. But I found out that her first book is being translated into English, so that led me to her website, and it turns out you can order all of her books on her website, and yarn and all kinds of good stuff. So Lincoln Newman is a Norwegian designer, and I just really love her aesthetic, and one of the reasons that I love this book is just not only the pattern's beautiful, but it's just full of this gorgeous photography, and it kind of allows you to imagine this Norwegian kind of life outdoors, ice fishing, roaming around with some sled dogs, and it's a beautiful collection of photographs and settings and just everything, especially for the winter. It just feels very, I don't know, I absolutely love it. So, plus all of the sweaters seem very wearable, very practical. These women and men are like wearing them out for ice fishing and all kinds of other things. So you just kind of like, you assume they're going to be warm, and they're going to be an outer layer. A lot of them are knit in Let Lopi or Alphos Lopi. And so they're outerwear sweaters, and they're gorgeous, full of color work. And I think she's riffing on a lot of different Norwegian traditions, just playing around with color and with a lot of the motifs and themes that she's using. So Spencer, my husband, and I actually ended up sitting down one evening and just looking through this book. So we spent a lot of time. And then I was on her Instagram feed, kind of learning a little bit more about her and some of the folks who are in this book. And she actually shot this book at a kind of farm or ranch in Norway where her friends keep racing sled dogs, and so that's where all the sled dogs come from, and the photographer for the book is actually one of the models, and it's just it's like a nice community kind of idea about the production of sample knitting all of these sweaters, and the photographer and the friends and the dogs, and anyway, wonderful story. So I got the book, it's in Norwegian, and we've done knits in translation on this podcast before, and it's one of my kind of favorite things to do. So I really like reading patterns from other cultures and other languages, and then translating them and thinking about the differences in terms of expectations for pattern writing, style, technique, all those kinds of things. So in this case, I had a little bit of a leg up because her patterns are relatively, they're not simple, but they're simply the recipe for them. They're almost like a recipe, and the recipe for them is fairly straightforward. So if you can understand the basics of sweater construction, top-down sweater construction, then you can pretty much jump into her sweaters and be just fine. And I also knit, as you guys know, her Alasuk dog sweater for both Tink and Millie. So that was in English and Norwegian. It had already been translated. So that meant that I had a kind of sense of how she writes patterns and what kinds of moves she makes and all that kind of good stuff. The thing that surprised me, and it probably won't surprise many of you, is that a lot of these patterns are 3-color color work. So even the dog sweater had a section of 3-color color work. And by 3-color color work, I mean in any row, a lot of Fair Isle and other color work, stranded color work, you tend to just work 2 colors in a row, even if you have multiple colors going on. You don't tend to get up to 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 colors in a single row, because the management of that, I'm using my hands, because the management of that gets a little bit tricky. So I tried it with the dog sweater. I found kind of like my own rhythm on how to do it. And then I watched a few videos on YouTube, and I'll put a couple in the show notes. There was one in particular, and I wish I could remember the name, it was just an excellent idea of like watching how the floats move and which float is above and which is below, and then kind of like holding off the third float, the third yarn that's going to produce a float that's a little higher than the other two, kind of over the top of the needle. Anyway, I'll put a link over in the show notes, but that kind of clicked it for me. And after that, the 3-color color work became much more doable, manageable with my hands. And as I've told you guys before, I do 2-color and now 3-color color work by, I'm a thrower. Normally I would throw with my right hand with the yarn, but I do continental with my left with the other color, contrast color, and then if I'm doing a 3rd color, I'll do that with the same on my left hand. So that's why I'm gesturing like this, not just giving you like the hand signals. So once I got used to the 3-color color work, then I and having done the dog sweater, I was like, oh, this is going to be an interesting knit. And it was, because it's 2-color color work most of the way. And then this section in here, pretty much anywhere you see these diagonals happening, these kind of bias looking bits, that's where you're going to have 3 colors, because you're going to have the background color, the contrast color, and then the introduction of the new color. So in these areas here where you see these kinds of angles going on, that's where you're going to end up with the 3-color or more color work. I think she only does 3 colors in her patterns, but don't hold me to that. I haven't looked at all of them. So I just realized I completely misspoke earlier. These aren't top-down sweaters. When I was talking about construction, if you can understand sweater construction, these are bottom-up sweaters. So if you understand construction that way and the production of yokes, like attaching the sleeves and then knitting the yoke, then her patterns are would be much more legible to you, even in Norwegian. So this is a bottom-up sweater, and I knit you can see it has some ribbing on the bottom. It's kind of nice and long. I love these colors. I did not pick these colors. I saw them on an Instagram post, and they looked on the Instagram post much more like this lighter blue. I thought the whole body of the sweater was going to be this kind of color of blue. And it turned out to be sea green, which is, there you go. So that's fine, because I do love this. This green is kind of like an emerald green. It's very jewel tony. It's very rich. It's very saturated. And so that makes me very happy. So it has ribbing on the bottom, and you knit the body up to about here, the armpits, and you knit the sleeves all the way up, including the color work that's on the sleeves. And I used the color work on the sleeves to kind of gauge whether or not I was going to need to go up a needle size for the main yoke. This I did not go up a needle size, and you can see just the slightest pull in just a little bit above the cuff. So I decided that since I had this little test swatch, I did go up a needle size once I got to the color work, and I think that made the whole sweater sit very nicely. There's no puckering, all that kind of worked out. And I knit the body and the sleeves pretty much while I was in meetings and just doing other stuff, because it's just straight stockinette. There's no shaping or anything like that in these sweaters. These really are meant to be kind of outerwear sweaters. You'd wear them over a ton of clothes. So you don't want a lot of tight-fitting shaping kind of things going on. You just want to have a thing you can pull on over a bunch of stuff. So like I said, I knit the body and the sleeves, which went really amazingly fast. Maybe I just have a lot of meetings, but that all went really quickly. And then when I got to the yoke, I had to really sit and pay attention because the chart has some really interesting decreases. Is that correct? Yes, the decreases are really interesting. Sorry, I was knitting like 5 different other sweaters and trying to remember this is decreases or increases. It has some really interesting decreases, and you can kind of see them here. So you can see that this green patch is a little wider at the bottom than it is at the top. So you hide the decreases for this yoke here, and then you hide them in the diamond. You can see that this diamond is a little more narrow, and this diamond is a little more narrow. So she does a really nice job of hiding the decreases for the yoke in a very evenly distributed way that hides them from the actual pattern, like maintains the actual pattern of the yoke, which I find amazing. I think that's kind of cool. And as you can see, the yoke runs all the way around the sleeves. So if you've ever put a raglan sweater together where you're bottom up, where you're knitting the bottom, you knit the sleeves, and then you join and you work your raglan decreases, this sweater is very similar in that you have your body and your sleeves, and then you join them to work in the round. The difference is that your decreases are spaced out throughout the yoke. So you have everything just goes all the way around, the sleeves and the back, and it's all continuous, which I think is really, really cool. There are a couple modifications and a couple things I would change the next time I did this one. The first modification is that I don't like tight ribbing, so I always do the ribbing in the same needle size as the body, and you can see that down there. It's just a personal preference kind of thing. And then I did an I-cord bind off for the upper neck, and the pattern pretty much just says bind off. But when you look at the pictures, you can see that it really does seem like most of her sweaters have some kind of I-cord at the top. So I went with a 2 to 3 stitch I-cord at the top in this particular color, and I had a little bit of a tricky yarn chicken game at the end here with this straw. I think this is the straw color. It was the lightest of the colors. And I ended up skipping a couple of rows up in here where the lighter color should have come back in. And that was just so that I would preserve enough of this light color for that I-cord edge all the way around on the sweater. And I think you can see back here where I was patching, when you have an I-cord which starts and stops, I was kind of patching it here, and you can barely see that right there. So not my best finishing work, but it worked out okay. So what would I do differently next time? I ended up making the body too long. Usually I make sweaters and I'm like, that's long enough, it'll be okay. And I put it on, I'm like, I'm always tugging at the bottom, like, if only I had an extra ½ inch, But I ended up making the body a little bit longer than I'd like, so I would shorten that. Like I said, I would go up a needle size for the sleeves, and I'd be a little bit more careful of my yardage, and I'm not sure exactly what happened here because I followed the yardage for I ordered enough yarn according to the size I was going to make. So I'm not exactly sure what happened and why I was playing yarn chicken at the end here, but that's one thing to know if you're knitting this particular size. I think this is the smallest of the sizes. I'll look and see. Yeah, I knit the smallest size, and even the smallest size used up all of the lightest contrast color yarn. So just note that for yourself, right? But otherwise, I'm very happy with it. I think the armhole depth for me is a little bit deep, so that's one other thing to potentially modify next time around. But with this sweater, I didn't end up doing a whole lot of modifications, in part because it was my first time doing 3-color work, translating a Norwegian pattern, and working this kind of yoke. I've worked a raglan yoke before, but not a circular yoke with decreases that are kind of spaced out throughout the 3-color work. So there were parts of modification in the lower part of the sweater that I felt totally comfortable with, but there are parts of modification up here that, I needed to make the sweater once to understand it, and now I think going back to any of the sweaters in this book, or any of her other designs, I would have a good sense of what she does and how she does it and why she does it. And then once you understand that, then it's easier to modify and make some changes, like to decrease the armhole depth, because basically you can see this is a swoop and you're doing the decreases, so your armhole depth is kind of more from here to here as opposed to from your neck down, because it kind of swoops in at the end. It's just a function of a circular yoke, I think. But since I'm learning that particular style of pattern, you know, I'm just one of those people that needs to see it in action and actually do it before I can go in and change it. So there you go. So this is Hopi by Lincoln Newman. I would highly recommend this book, even just as like a coffee table book. It's gorgeous just to look at. I want to get her other book. I might get the English translation just because. But I would encourage all of you guys to keep up the knits in translation if you're interested. We have a thread over in the Ravelry group for knits in translation, and tons of people from around the world over there who are happy to help if you have questions about translating from a different language. Yeah, it's wonderful. And I'm actually knitting my mom a sweater right now that's in my, this is my Bags by Awesome Granny bag. I love this bag. It has like shoulder straps. It's huge. It can fit like a massive sweater in it. Zipper top, so all the dust and dog hair stay out of it. It's lined. It's a really fun bag. I love my Bags by Awesome Granny. She's actually having a sale, a post-Christmas sale, and I think everything's 40% off. So if you're interested in getting a bag, head over to Bags by Awesome Granny. And in this bag, I've got a full sweater that I'm knitting for my mom, plus all the yarn. And I'm not going to tell you about it right now too much because I want to save it for a later cast. Plus I've got some technique videos coming out with it. I'm adding pockets to it, all that kind of good stuff. But this pattern is a German pattern that was very roughly like Google translated into English. And so when my mom and I picked it out, I thought, oh, it's translated into English. This, you know, and it has the German. This will be really interesting. But the translation is just Google Translate. So there are still a lot of German abbreviations and some stylistic things that German knitters might understand better than American knitters. So I took some help from my friend Beth, who speaks German, and we sat there with the pattern and kind of played around with trying to figure out a couple of little things. So it's in translation. It's kind of like going from the easy Sudoku to like the challenging Sudoku. I find that even with sweaters that would be simple construction, just go into another language. Adds just that little bit of mystery and challenge, which is kind of fun. Yeah. But yeah, I would highly recommend the Lincoln Newman stuff, especially if you're interested in beautiful color work and beautiful photography and all that kind of stuff. All right, segment 2. I realized that I haven't been doing as much history on here, and I happen to be reading this book, which is called Harvest: The Hidden Histories of 7 Natural Objects. And this one is by Edward Posnett. And he was apparently a finance guy, and he kind of got out of the finance business, wrote an essay on eiderdown, and that won a big prize, and then turned it into a book. So I'm about halfway through the book, and I read the first couple sections on eiderdown and on edible birds' nests. And it's interesting because a lot of what he's talking about in here are symbiotic, or what appear to be symbiotic relationships between humans and animals or plants, and the kind of like harvesting that is done to collect nests or to collect eiderdown, or vicuna fibers in here, sea silk, which I'll talk about. And it's interesting to think about like the symbiosis of, say, the eiderdown, because it's produced by these ducks, and the ducks come in to Iceland, to settlements, to where people are, and they want to hang out by the people, and the people kind of protect them, and then harvest the eiderdown from the nests once the ducks leave, and use it for all kinds of things, you know, for down coats or down blankets, or, you know, all that kind of stuff, warmth stuff. But it's symbiotic in that the people want to work with the ducks, but then it's definitely not symbiotic in that they're killing a lot of Arctic foxes to keep the ducks safe. So there's some really interesting kind of like ecosystem, human involvement in ecosystem stuff going on throughout the book. And I just last night got to this section on sea silk. Now, for those of you who are like me and thought you knew something about sea silk, I was completely wrong. So I thought sea silk, you know, I've seen sea silk advertised in yarns on Etsy and a bunch of other, you know, other places. They're like sea silk, and if you look at it, it actually is silk mixed with sea cell, and sea cell is a fiber that's produced. It's constructed. It's like a celluloid fiber that's constructed from algae and lyocell. So there's some kind of process that like a chemical reaction. They chop up the algae, add this lyocell, and then extrude, I think, this cellulose fiber. I think that's how it's done. Don't quote me on that part. That's just, that wasn't in this book. That's just me trying to figure that out. So sea cell is a fiber that you might see mixed in with silk, and it's very soft, and algae is supposed to be good for your skin and all kinds of stuff, but it's often advertised as sea silk. And so when I saw this chapter on sea silk, I was like, oh, cool, I know, maybe I'll learn something about, the algae stuff that's mixed into my yarn. No, not at all. So it turns out sea silk is actually produced by Pinna. Let's see, let me get the actual name for you here. Pinna nobilis. And it's a mussel, a common mussel, and it's the beard. It's the fibers that the mussel extrudes, like silk, to attach itself to wherever it's hanging out. So, and the harvest for this sea silk is actually pretty difficult to do. And then beyond the harvesting, it's even more difficult to clean it and process it and make it useful. So yeah, I learned a lot just by like thinking I knew something about sea silk and then reading about it and finding out that it's actually a fiber that's really hard to come by. I kind of wonder if it's as scarce as Kiviot, or if it's less scarce. I don't know. I still have to do some more research on this, but thus far, I thought I would share with you a little bit of the history of sea silk and what it's been used for, and all the different civilizations and cultures that have used it in different ways, which the list is kind of huge here. So I'll read you just a little bit of a description of what the sea silk actually looks like and where it comes from, and then just go through this chapter a little bit. So in their raw state underwater, the beards of the pinna, that's the mussel, resemble brown moss full of algae and small shells, but once cleaned and combed, they're transformed into golden threads commonly known as sea silk. Since at least the time of Tertullian, nearly 2,000 years ago, these threads have been prized for their shine and strangeness. And then he goes through a ton of different Chinese civilization, the Byzantine Emperor, Justinian, Armenian, like just antiquity, Romans. It's in the Bible. It's all over the place, turns out. And there's this great paragraph in here where he says, many tales have been told about sea silk. In the 2nd and 3rd centuries, Chinese traders spoke of aquatic sheep, which would emerge from the sea and scratch against rocks, leaving their wool behind. Arab traders in the 10th century told of a cloth that was made from the hairs shed by a sea monster called Abu Qualman. Chiara, too, this is a weaver that he talks about in depth. Chiara, too, added to her own stories to this history. The Chaldeans, Egyptians, Greeks, and Jews all used byssus. That's the other name for sea silk, byssus, B-Y-S-S-U-S. So they all used byssus to make their sacred vestments, she said. There were even references to it in the Bible. So yeah, it's all over the place. Now, a couple other things I thought might be interesting for you guys are the actual process of trying to clean it and who's involved in that. So there was a bunch of movements to try to manufacture sea silk and make it into the kind of commodity good. And that's one of the things that he's talking about throughout the book, is how these animal goods, which exist in a kind of interesting relationship with human beings, can become or not become commodity goods based on their scarcity, or whether or not it's actually practical or possible to even produce them under certain conditions, for example. So the most common means of harvesting byssus, or sea silk, was to rely on traditional methods, where fishermen would haul the shells up using metal tongs, an exhausting process, and remove the byssus by hand. Then there was cleaning, spinning, and weaving of byssus, a repetitive process often carried out by women. Harsh and full of impurities, byssus had to be painstakingly worked, again, by hand. In 1916, Giuseppe Basso Arnaud, a Sardinian doctor, related how he sent a batch of sea silk to a textile factory near Basel, but it was rejected on the grounds that it would take too long to clean. According to Medier, sea silk weaving remained a local practice confined mainly to the home, girls' schools, orphanages, and convents. Pretty interesting stuff. So the next time you pick up yarn and it says sea silk, consider that it might not be sea silk. It's probably something else. But I'm really fascinated to finish this chapter. And he goes into a couple of different weavers who supposedly go out and harvest their own byssus by diving down and sustainably, removing part of the mussels beard and bringing it back and processing it, and they process a certain amount of pounds per year. And there's a kind of debate about which weaver is actually the one who kind of holds the most ethos in terms of their ability to gather and process and weave with the byssus. But apparently, if you can go and see, there are a couple museums. One is of this woman that he talks about earlier in the chapter, and she has a museum and where she shows off her textiles that she's made with the byssus fiber. So yeah, for what it's worth, I learned a lot about sea silk and its history, and the fact that it's all over the world, and that it's been harvested by seafaring and coastal cultures for centuries. And it's a pretty interesting fiber. And I'd love to get my hands on, just to touch it, Supposedly it feels kind of like human hair, or even softer than silk. He talks about the micron count at some point, and it's a very low micron count, incredibly soft, and a lot like silk. So there you go. Harvest. This is by Edward Posnett, and I'm really enjoying this one. Like I said, there's eiderdown, vicuna, edible bird's nest, guano, all kinds of different things in here that are kind of fun to think about. So yeah. So last segment is a little bit of bits and bobs of things around the community that I thought were worth drawing attention to. And the first one is this new book, which is Little Women Knits, and this is by Johanna Johnson, and it is illustrated by Laurel Johnson, and the yarn for the knits was produced by her friend, who she met at a yarn fiber festival. So 6 and 7 fiber is the fiber for this, and that is Rachel Lundstrom's project. So here are the two of them. They're really adorable pictures of the two of them. So yarn producer and pattern designer. And one of the things about this book, and the reason that I have it, is because my friend Jennifer Geyer is a model for one of the shawls. There she is. Way to go, Jennifer. Styling in that shawl. So this is Jen Geyer, and Jennifer and I have known each other for many years now. She lived in Loveland, Colorado, and my mother-in-law and my whole husband's family live out in Boulder, Colorado, so we're very nearby. And we visited her and did a skirting video with her, and we've stayed in touch and exchanged yarn. And anyway, it's been a really wonderful, fun relationship. And so she sent me a little copy of this book, and I think it's wonderful. I think the knits in here are gorgeous, the yarn is gorgeous, and I loved seeing her face in the book. So if you are interested in shawls and sweaters and socks and a kind of fun look back at Little Women, if that was one of your favorite books, which it was, I really loved Little Women. Looks like her sister illustrated some of the beautiful art in here. There's gorgeous photography. There's baby knits in here, which I have a grandbaby on the way. And this looks pretty promising as far as cute knits go. So that's one shout out, things going on in the community. So the second shout out I wanted to give today is to Mina Phillip, who's just put out a beautiful book called Cowls Inspired by Persia, and it's a colorwork exploration of tropes and themes from Iran, from Iranian knitting traditions. And she uses this method called this any gauge method, so that you can use the yarns you have, you can use whatever gauge you're getting, and she kind of helps you with these recipes to explore how you can import these kind of beautiful tropes and themes and colorworks into the knitting that you have on hand, the yarn that you have on hand. So I think the book is beautiful, and I'll put a couple images up in here so that you can see it. It's available on Ravelry and through her Etsy shop, and it's I just find it really kind of inspiring, and I love the idea of a cowl, especially this time of year. It's a quick knit, learning about a new tradition in knitting, so this is a great opportunity to do that. So Mina Phillip and Cowls Inspired by Persia is the book, so check it out. And last but not least, I have a couple of shout outs of my own. Thank you to Lynn and to Alicia for your donations to Ko-fi that help keep this podcast running. I really appreciate your support. Thank you so much. Alicia, you shouldn't have, and I really appreciate it. Thank you. And I have the winner of the giveaway, which was a pattern, a beautiful lupine blossom pattern from Ravid Eckstein. And the winner is Johanna Pfeiffer, who was a commenter on YouTube. So Johanna, congratulations on winning the pattern. If you get in touch with me either via email, email's probably the easiest. Let me know your Ravelry ID and your email, and I can get you in touch with Ravi to get your prize. So congratulations to Johanna. So I think that's it for today. It was lovely to spend some time with you guys, and I hope you enjoyed the tour through the Hopi sweater from Norway and the sea silk from around the world in terms of its history. So I will see you guys in a couple of weeks. Take good care. Happy New Year, and bye-bye.